This video is for educational and documentary purposes only. It contains no ideology or propaganda. Birth of the Mustang. It was 1940. Europe was in flames, and Britain was fighting alone against the Luftwaffe. Convoys sank under German bombs, and British airmen desperately needed an aircraft that could escort bombers deep into enemy territory. North American aviation had never built a fighter before, yet it took the challenge anyway. The British initially wanted a redesigned P-40, but the American engineers insisted on starting from scratch. On May 5, 1940, the firm signed the contract. In 102 days, they designed and built a prototype. Such urgency reflected the Allies' desperation. On October 26, 1940, that prototype, designated NA-73X, took to the skies. The early test flights were a revelation. Pilots said the airplane was so responsive, it felt like part of their bodies. Later, the British christened it the Mustang, comparing it to a wild horse, free and powerful. At a small factory near Los Angeles, draftsmen slept on their drawing boards, mechanics shared sandwiches, engineers worked through the night. They shaped an aircraft around a thin, laminar flow wing calculated in cooperation with NACA and a revolutionary radiator design that turned waste heat into thrust. Those details allowed the Mustang to fly fast and far without an enormous engine. An engineering revolution. People who saw the drawings marveled at the finesse. The wing was so slim that one engineer joked, "Our landing gear takes up more space than the airfoil." A two-spar structure and laminar profile cut drag dramatically. The most radical element was the cooling system. Instead of sticking radiators in the wing or nose, the designers hung a scoop under the belly. As hot coolant flowed through, the air expanded, producing a small but real thrust, an effect known as the Meredith effect. It gave the Mustang free speed and allowed designers to keep the wing compact. Mathematicians sweated over curves and loft lines. On mechanical calculators, they searched for shapes that sliced through air with minimal friction. Every contour was drafted by hand, tested in a wind tunnel, and refined again. The cockpit sat far back to clear a long nose, housing an Allison V-1710 engine, while the tail boom looked almost fragile. In fact, it endured astonishing loads. Pilots would later say the Mustang knew what you wanted before you moved the stick. The result balanced speed and range like nothing before. The prototype reached almost 390 miles per hour, and internal fuel promised a 1,000-mile radius. That was science fiction in 1940. It was also cheap, built from ordinary aluminum with conventional rivets and available engines. The designers knew war would be long, so they made something that could be mass-produced by ordinary workers on the West Coast, far from the bottlenecks of Detroit. Early limitations? The first Mustangs were far from perfect. The Allison V-1710 performed beautifully at low altitude, but lost power above 5,000 meters. British units used these machines for reconnaissance and ground attack, especially in Sicily and Tunisia. They were nimble, dived superbly, and burned half as much fuel as the heavy P-47 Thunderbolt. American pilots quipped, "The Thunderbolt drinks like a truck, 1.8 miles per gallon. The Mustang sips like a family car, 3.3 miles. Yet they could not tangle with BF-109s or FW-190s at bomber altitudes. Commanders understood that a true escort must fight from above. The Merlin solution. A solution came from Britain. In April 1942, test pilot Ronald Harker of Rolls-Royce flew one of the early Mustangs. He returned to Farnborough elated and frustrated. "The airframe is superb," he said, "but the engine strangles it." Harker proposed fitting the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 with a two-stage supercharger into the American fuselage. The idea met resistance. Officials in London worried about wasting scarce Merlins. Officials in Washington balked at retooling factories. Harker persisted. A Mustang was shipped to Rolls-Royce's experimental shop. In November, the hybrid flew. The transformation astonished everyone. Top speed jumped to 441 miles per hour, climb rate doubled, and fuel consumption barely changed. Thus was born the P-51B, the first Merlin-powered Mustang. It entered combat in spring 1943. Pilots fell in love with it. Bud Anderson of the 357th Fighter Group said the Merlin gave gobs of power. We could fly high, we could fly low, and most importantly, we could fly a very long time. Within months, P-51BC squadrons were escorting B-17s and B-24s deep into Germany. Brigadier General Thomas Hayes, operations chief of the 8th Air Force, summed up their new priority in 3 words: range, range, and range. Without escort all the way to Berlin and back, the bomber offensive would bleed itself white. The long, hard war. The year 1943 was brutal for the Allies. The Luftwaffe still fielded thousands of seasoned pilots, and its interceptors ruled the skies over the Reich. America's factories turned out hundreds of flying fortresses and liberators every month, but each raid cost dozens. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg missions that August were disastrous. 60 of 376 bombers were lost, and another 200 damaged. Nearly 40% of the attacking force was written off, while German fighter units remained largely intact. By December, American planners decided the bombers must have cover to the target and home again. That meant fighters needed to travel 800 kilometers across Europe, engage the enemy, and still return. In early 1944, engineers squeezed an 85-gallon tank behind the cockpit and hung 108-gallon drop tanks under the wings. With those, the P-51 reached 1,700 miles of range. It could fly at 33,000 feet and 440 miles per hour from English bases to East Prussia. Bomber crews christened the sleek escort Little Friends. The sight of a silver Mustang sliding into formation lifted morale like nothing else. In February, the Allies launched Big Week, a sustained assault on the German aircraft industry. For 6 days, more than 1,000 heavy bombers and 835 fighters battered factories across the Reich. Losses were heavy: 266 bombers and 28 fighters, with 2,600 airmen killed or captured. Yet Big Week gutted the Luftwaffe. 1/3 of its single-engine fighters and 18% of its fighter pilots were lost. By D-Day, German airfields were eerily quiet. They could muster only a few hundred sorties. 8th Air Force staff noted a new fear on enemy frequencies. Mustang panic was real. Little Friends saved the bombers. Through the spring of 1944, the number of Mustangs in Europe exploded. By March 1751, P-51B/C aircraft were in theater. Later that year, the P-51D appeared. It featured a bubble canopy providing excellent rearward visibility, 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns, and the K-14 lead computing gun sight. The new feed system virtually eliminated jams. The Mustang D became both a guardian and a hunter. It escorted bombers, strafed convoys, and blasted airfields. P-51Ds roamed ahead of bomber streams, clearing the skies. Pilots told stories that still feel incredible. On one midday in 1944, Harrison Bud Tordoff watched a Me-262 jet gliding in to land. Tordoff dropped behind, lined up his 6 guns, and shredded the jet. It was one of the first kills against a Me-262. Many aces admitted that when the rocket-fast German jets flashed past, their hearts sank. Yet the Mustang could accelerate enough in a dive to get one chance. Against piston-engined Bf-109s and FW-19s, the P-51 was devastating. Its high-energy turn and great speed let it dictate the fight. Intelligence officers warned only of a vulnerability. One bullet through the radiator could cook the engine. So Mustang pilots avoided head-on passes and tail chases where return fire was thick. Anatomy of the P-51D. Stand beside a P-51D and appreciate its balance. Up front sits the Packard V-1650-7, a licensed Merlin producing 1,490 horsepower. Internal fuel in the wings holds 180 gallons. The fuselage tank adds 85. Drop tanks increase the total above 300. That combination yields more than 1,000 miles of range. At 26,000 feet, the aircraft climbs through 437 miles per hour. 6 Browning M2 machine guns converge their fire at roughly 300 yards. The Mustang can carry 2 1,000-pound bombs or up to 10 rockets. The teardrop canopy offers 360-degree vision, vital when an attacking fighter can appear from any direction. Empty, the Mustang weighs about 7,000 pounds, loaded over 10,000. Yet pilots describe the controls as almost light. The flight manual reminded them, hold right rudder on takeoff. At altitude, reduce RPM and enjoy. Instruments were logically arranged. The K-14 gun sight allowed a pilot to dial in a target's wingspan and closing speed. The sight computed the necessary lead automatically. That saved lives in split-second dogfights. Daily life, weather, and psychology. Escorting bombers was grueling. A mission to Berlin might last 8 hours. Pilots strapped into cramped cockpits in heavy fleece suits. In winter, the temperature at altitude fell below -20 degrees Celsius. In summer, the greenhouse canopy became an oven. Oxygen masks chafed faces. Fingers went numb despite gloves. Worst was the waiting. German fighters materialized out of sun glare or clouds as suddenly as ghosts. P-51 pilots flew at 8,000 to 10,000 meters, scanning endlessly. A day's routine was unchanging: a pre-dawn wake-up, watery coffee, a briefing where commanders drew lines across Europe. Stay close to the bombers, they drilled. If you see a jet, shoot it immediately. Hundreds of engines roared into life. As each bomber element assembled, the noise shook villages in England. Mustangs took station above and ahead of their charges. Each flight looked after one box. Pilots watched the horizon, their gauges and their fuel. A vibration, a drop in pressure, a flickering light. Any of these could mean gliding home alone through enemy territory. Psychologists later noted that monotony sometimes protected minds. Men stared at endless sky and thought of home, a wife's smile, a child's laugh, bacon sizzling. Then a call crackled. Bandits! Time slowed. Hands shoved throttles forward, feet stamped pedals, hearts hammered. Choices had to be made in seconds. Many aviators confessed they felt relief when a fight was over, even if it meant firing at another human being. Fear was constant, but training and duty pushed it aside. Duel with the Luftwaffe. The Mustang met Germany's finest, Bf-109Gs and FW-190As. Those fighters had powerful engines and heavy cannon. In low-level vertical maneuvers, they could still challenge. German pilots tried diving attacks from above or slashing through bomber formations, but the Mustang's speed and endurance countered them. American squadrons invented free hunt. Rather than clinging to bombers' tails, flights surged ahead and up, breaking up enemy formations before they could pounce. It was daring. It worked. The greatest threat was the jet-propelled Me-262. 100 miles per hour faster than any propeller aircraft, it could not be caught in level flight. Allied doctrine dictated ambush. Mustangs orbited Me-262 bases, waiting for jets to take off or land. As the German planes slowed on approach, they became vulnerable. American pilots described it as a paradoxical hunt, pursuing the hunters. The Me-262 pilots, in turn, cursed the long-tailed devils that haunted their runways. Hermann Göring himself would later admit, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the game was up." Voices from the war. What did these men feel? Bud Anderson said, "The Mustang was like a fine horse. The more you rode it, the better it understood you. The Merlin felt like someone was kicking you in the back." Jack Ilfrey recalled, "We were over the clouds on D-Day and suddenly we saw ships approaching the shore. Bombs fell, flak blossomed. I wasn't scared. I felt like I was watching history happen." General Hayes, sending letters to families of fallen pilots, wrote, "Anyone who straps into a Mustang must know why he goes. We lost men, but we saved thousands." Records reveal fascinating bits. One report notes, the average life of a fighter pilot in 1943 was 10 missions. After Mustangs arrived, it increased to 20. Another states, after 1 month of intensive operations, the German fighter force on this front had ceased to exist as an organized unit. Psychologists found that P-51 pilots suffered less severe post-traumatic stress because they felt mastery over the enemy. Chaplains observed that confidence could ward off despair. Losses and statistics. Victory had a price. By war's end, more than 14,000 Mustangs had been built, over 8,300 of them the D model. P-51 groups claimed 4,950 enemy aircraft shot down and 4,131 destroyed on the ground. Roughly 2,520 Mustangs were lost. While numbers vary among sources, the aircraft stands as America's most successful fighter. It escorted heavy bombers, bombed bridges, shot down V-1 flying bombs, and even strafed Japanese shipping. Bomber units that had suffered casualty rates as high as 77% saw their losses plummet when P-51s arrived. 8th Air Force statistics show that in August 1943 there were 33 bomber losses per 1,000 sorties. By August 1944, the figure was 7. German pilots, having lost 1/3 of their comrades in Big Week, lamented that they could not train replacements fast enough. Fuel shortages crippled training even more. Mustang flights roamed the skies 2 and 3 at a time, pouncing on any Bf-109 that dared climb. Life after the war. When the war ended, Mustangs did not retire quietly. In 1946, some went to the U.S. National Guard. During the Korean War, the P-51 served as a ground attack platform, bombing columns and bridges. Its piston engine made it vulnerable to Soviet-supplied MiG-15 jets, but in twisting valleys where jets could not turn, the P-51 was deadly. In the 1950s, thousands of surplus Mustangs were sold to allies and civilians. They served in Swiss, Swedish, Kenyan, and Indonesian colors. Many still fly today at air shows, their Merlin exhaust crackling like a pack of angry wolves. The Mustang entered pop culture. Western novels, comics, and postage stamps reproduced its silhouette. Pilots formed veterans clubs. Younger enthusiasts bought worn-out airframes and turned them into racing thoroughbreds. At the Reno air races, modified P-51s still exceed 500 miles per hour. The aircraft became a symbol of American ingenuity and international collaboration. A British engine in an American fuselage with Canadian pilots and Brazilian aluminum. Legacy and lessons. The story of the P-51 is about cooperation and courage. Against bureaucracy and wartime inertia, engineers from two nations collaborated on a radical design. Leaders took risks to change engines and schedules. Pilots with minimal training climbed into new machines and learned on the job. And they won. The Mustang became Germany's worst nightmare, not just because it was fast and long-legged, but because it represented a new world where technology and mass production would decide wars. Göring sensed that world when he saw silver fighters over Berlin. To the modern viewer, this may seem like just another airplane story, yet it illuminates deeper questions. How do individual ideas shift the course of history? How does technology become a psychological weapon? How does courage overcome terror? The P-51 proves that a breakthrough can happen even in the darkest of times. Its tale is one among many where little friends turned the tide.